Great. Good morning, everyone. Do a little mic check, video check. Ryan, how do I sound? How's it look?
Sounds great.
Good, good. Um, well, good morning, everyone. We'll get started right on time here. Thank you for joining us this morning. Um, I'm Ray Valley. I'll be your host today. My involvement with BioBase goes way back to its beginnings in 2011. My original training and early career was fisheries ecology, and I spent 10 years in fisheries research at the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. So BioBase is a system designed by aquatic resource professionals for aquatic resource professionals. And even though this is billed as a training webinar, I do want to impress upon you that it's actually not that complicated to get really good aquatic habitat data sets. And at BioBase, we see that the map is the means to the end for our customers and not the end in and of itself. Before we get started, there's still people coming in, and we'll just kind of take care of some housekeeping stuff and give people some time to get in and whatnot. But um, I do want to thank you for your feedback. Many of you answered. We had a little pre-webinar questionnaire. It really helped me focus this webinar on what is important to most of you. We have a wide variety of attendees with many who are pretty experienced users and many who have never used the system at all. So I apologize in advance to the new users, especially because it may seem like I'm opening a fire hose of information, especially since we only have an hour and a half. But we are recording this, so and I'll be sure to get the recording out to all of you in a timely manner after we're done here, so you don't have to try to absorb everything right here. You can kind of go back and review the parts that are of interest to you. And this is the first time I'm giving this webinar in this all format with Teams and all this kind of stuff, and don't know quite how long it's going to take. And I do want to leave time for some questions. So we're just going to have to kind of shift on the fly here. I have my colleague Ryan Sullivan, who popped in a little earlier. Ryan, you can turn on your mic,
Hi, everyone.
and there's Ryan. So you can go ahead. Why don't you just say what you want to do with Q&A?
Sure. So I'll be looking at the Q&A section. Feel free to post your questions, and then I will get them over to Ray as soon as we get a chance. And then we also have an option maybe where other people can answer it, but hopefully we can get to all of them in the time allotted. And if all else fails, if we don't get to it, email us. You know how to get in touch with us. Send over your questions and we can get you an answer.
Thank you, Ryan. All right, let's start cracking. Sir, so as we go along here, have build this as a two-part webinar. First, we're going to start out with this high-level description of the system. And this is what the PowerPoint presentation is going to be. I want to talk a little bit about the hardware and installation. Yeah, that might be the least interesting, but it's possibly the most important. Anyway, we'll focus a little bit on that first, and then we'll get into kind of the system design processing, how the system works. I have this survey design in gray here because we're going to pop up, once we're done with A, B, and C here, we're going to pop out to the web to go online, and we're just going to take a little user journey through through an online demo account. And we're going to highlight the major features in the system. Okay. And then we'll come back to the survey design question and talk about some tips and tricks and transect design and spacing and things like that. So can't dwell too much on any one subject, but we're going to kind of try to go a mile wide, 6 inches deep here. And we might follow up later with other more kind of in-depth deep dive webinars. So, all right. Okay, so first we're going to establish a little context. We're going to talk about kind of where BioBase sits in the broader space of creating maps, consumer technology versus commercial technology, and kind of this concept of fit for purpose. Then we're going to talk installation, and then we're going to get into the weeds, pun intended, of acoustics and getting the data. How do you get the data? And then we'll go from there. So first, fit for purpose mapping and surveying. It basically says we want to use the right methods, the right equipment, and also most importantly, or very importantly, and I think it's overlooked, is the right budget for the job. And consumer devices are worlds better than they ever were before, and they quote unquote do the job in many ways that we never previously thought. And you can acquire highly accurate and precise data at a fraction of the cost, 10 years ago. So when we talk about what purposes is consumer sonar and GPS fit for, these are the major ones: rapid assessment and reconnaissance, repeated monitoring. You want to be going out on whatever lake or pond or river or whatever, and there's something happening out there. Things are changing quickly. This system is really, you can really rapidly deploy it, get data very, very fast. Water volume estimation, aquatic plant abundance and cover, bottom hardness, structure ID and mapping, side scan assessments. We won't, that could be a whole seminar just in of itself. But that's another advancement in technology that's really pretty neat. Fish counting, and we're going to talk, and a little preview here. We're going to highlight that fish counting more in 2025. Stay tuned. We're working on that feature, and that's going to be pretty exciting, I think. And I think a lot of people on this call will find that exciting as well when we get into this fish layer we're developing. But consumer sonar also too is not fit for these purposes. If you're doing formal underwater structural inspections or channel maintenance for commercial navigation, surveying for bridges, high definition mapping of the ocean floor, if you're doing fish biomass, or when the rules simply don't allow or they require a certain level of precision because that's just the rules, that's where you want to get into the higher grade stuff. Okay, enough for that. All right, installation. So what I want to impress upon you here is to take some time to install your system right, because it's one of those things. BioBase is a lot of wash, rinse, repeat, and if you get your installation right, it's great. You can wash, rinse, repeat. If you get it wrong, you're gonna run into troubles, and you're gonna consistently get bad outputs because there's something wrong with your installation. Some of the vessels that you can do the BioBase thing on it's a wide range. I mean, you can everything from electrofishing boat to a big survey vessel to remote controlled boats, automated or completely automated boats. We work with a company that you can do herbicide applications, has a big tank on the boat, and in addition have the BioBase system and the Lowrance system. You can do it in a $250 kayak or a canoe. This is an example. We were mapping waters in the remote boundary waters area of Minnesota. So you can put it on a canoe. Here's our portable pack that just on a little boat. And you can even, these transducers are pretty low cost, and you can put those on, they even have spring-loaded kickback plates that you put this on an airboat, so if you go over a cattail bog or whatever, that will spring back. So there's a lot of options there. So electrical installation, this is on the left as an example of what not to do. If you have a really simple, if you just have a simple setup, a boat where you just get like the BioBase portable kit, I mean, it's like 2 wires. So it's not a big deal. But we also work with a lot of people that have pretty complicated console with all kinds of other electrical devices hooked up and whatnot, and you're just kind of plugging the Lowrance into that system. So when you're going to do that, and these are a lot of things that I learned the hard way. Use good wire. I mean, it's the little things. It's paying attention to the little things. and that's often overlooked. Using good wire, 10 to 14 gauge marine tin, so it's not corroding, right? Use a good 12-volt cranking battery or a 12-volt battery. A cranking battery works really well. If you're not using a cranking battery, you can get these lithium iron phosphate batteries, and they're great. They last a long time, and but be monitoring that voltage. Make sure you're getting 11 to 14 volts, and you can put that voltage display on the Lowrance unit, and it's a really great feature. Make sure your connections aren't overloaded. These are just kind of basic electrical things to pay attention to. Ensure if you've got multiple transducers, they're not pinging at the same time. And dress the power cables up, keep things neat. And just be aware of interfering devices. Sometimes, I mean, electrical stuff is sometimes kind of weird, and you'll get weird interference sometimes for really unknown reasons. There's like something in the air. I don't get it, but sometimes I see that on my display. Um, in a really good circumstance, here's an example of a really good clear signal. Bottom is really strong return. The open water, it's white, it's clear. There's not a lot of backscatter. Here's an example of vegetation growing on the bottom. Really nice clear signal. Here's an example of where it's not good. You have a weak bottom signal. If you could put a bottom line on your display, and that's really helpful. And something like this, you can see how that bottom is jumping all up and down over a pretty consistent bottom. It's pretty faint color. The color that you see on the Lowrance display, that color, a hot color means it's a strong echo return. This purple, now it depends on the color palette you're using, but in general, the dimmer colors or the like a purple color is going to be that's a weak signal. Also, if you see these weird streaks of interference, there's some kind of interference going on the boat. So check your connections, play around with something, look to see when that interference disappears on your display. Play around with that. All right, so correct, and so that's the display. Then correctly installing your transducer. Want to just focus a little bit on that because it's really crucial to collecting accurate and usable data. And I should back up. What we're talking about, you're going to see all this reference to Lowrance or Simrad consumer sonar. Those are the two devices for which right now we are solely compatible. We're working on compatibility with other devices, but for right now, we're just compatible with Lowrance and Simrad. But so one of the things that you want to pay attention to with the transducer, if the transducer is too low, too high, slanted, or not angled correctly, or if it's placed in a spot with interference. If that's the case, then you're gonna get some problematic, or you're gonna get some, you might get some poor outputs. What does this look like? Here's an example of the good where the installation is correct. The face of the transducer is flush with the hull of the boat. You have a smooth flow of water across the face of the transducer. This was a simulation actually done by Lowrance showing what it looks like underwater at speed. Then you should have a nice smooth flow of water. You should be able to, if you have your transducer installed correct, you should be able to go wide open throttle, 45 miles an hour, and should still be able to read bottom. And then this is an example of using a flat edge, and it's also a level, making sure that that transducer is level with the bottom at the angle that the boat is going to be in the water with you sitting in it. So that's something to be cognizant of. There is an example here. There's a transducer. If you search YouTube for transducer coin trick, it shows you some really easy tips for getting your transducer leveled right. So just spending a little bit of time getting that leveled right, and then making some, maybe with a marker or something, making it, if you're using a portable bracket, making it know where you kind of lock that down and you're getting a good signal. That's kind of useful to do. This is an example of a bad transducer installation. This is often overlooked here. It looks like it's installed fine, but it's a little too low. And what happens, that water comes off the hull of the boat, hits this, either the bracket or the transducer, causes turbulence, and then you could get a loss of the bottom. And this is an example of these big air bubbles coming in on the bottom of the transducer. And that's where you're going to have problems with the outputs. You'll see it on your sonar display. You'll lose the bottom at certain speeds, or you're just getting or you're getting a lot of plumes of interference coming off the top of the water. Here's an example of that, of a poorly, or a transducer that's tilted. And what you would see on your sonar display is when you're going the slope, you're going to see this thick, what looks like a thick bottom. And then let's say when you turn around and you go down, you're going to see really a thin signal. So that's just something to pay attention to. And we have a quality control department. We're also looking at that stuff. We've looked at, hundreds of thousands of sonar logs, if not, we're probably over millions. And so we're going to give you feedback on that too. So we're kind of your coaches. You're not on your own. We'll help you along the way. So we have the good, the bad, and the ugly. I like to show this just because this is the range of things that we don't really deal with it much in with BioBase, but actually this one, the upside down one, was a BioBase user. So I take that back. This is actually the transducer got put on upside down, and this user was wondering why all of his output, no matter what depth he was in, it was always reading 2 feet. Well, it was because this transducer was 2 feet below the surface and it was pointing up. So anyway, there you go. Also the 0.1 GPS. The 0.1 GPS, there is a GPS display in the unit. This is an example of our portable kit. There is a GPS in the display. However, the 0.1 GPS is great because if you want to put that display like on the console, or if it's not lined up with the transducer, this gets you lined up with the transducer. And also this has a heading compass in it. There's a little arrow that's on there that you need to make sure that arrow is facing forward with the boat, because that's going to line up your positions and make sure that you get really nice when we talk about side scan. That's really important, that arrow is pointing forward. Another thing that people often overlook. But then this is an example, right? You want to get that GPS lined up with the transducer. So your X, Y, and Z positions are all lined up. All right, congratulations. You installed your equipment correctly. Now don't touch anything. All right, so now we can kind of get into the weeds, pun intended, of acoustics and getting the data. So you'll hear the term 3-in-1 transducers, and what the three transducers are is broadband, traditional, 2D sonar. These are all terms that you hear in kind of the consumer space. 2D. That means I'm trying to figure out what 2D really means, but that's what the traditional broadband. And when I say broadband, it's more like a flashlight beam. It's a circular beam, and that's the 2D sonar. Then there's downscan and side scan. I describe these as almost like a copy scanner, and you can see how thin this beam is. It's like a copy scanner beam. So you have downscan that's shooting straight. Actually, downscan is not really shown on here, but it's a slice of the scanning beam. So you have downscan, and the downscan is subtracted out of this image here of the side scan, and then you have side scan where it looks to the left and it looks to the right of the boat, and then it maps the structure. So when we talk about, how large of an area is this pinging, we need to talk a little bit about beams and beam angles and trigonometry, and oh, what fun. But it does require you to harken back to your high school trigonometry and And it's actually, this is a great example, like, hey, I'm actually using something I learned in high school math. But anyway, this is just an example. There's the 3-in-1 transducers. They have a 22-degree cone, and so your half beam angle is 11. So at 5-foot depth, the acoustic cone covers approximately 2 feet of the bottom, and then that's going to change as you get deeper. And here's just an example of that schematic from the top down. And then this is just an image to kind of show you how, and maybe should have put the slide before we talked about the beam angles, but this just shows the side scan and the advancements of how much side scan has come along. And this is an example of just a rocky bottom, and we can map that structure. And that's all in that SL2 file. When you record your sonar, that is all in that file. So we have the down looking, we have the side scan, we have all that information, and we can create maps when you upload it to BioBase. All right, so now back to the basics of traditional down looking sonar, and let's just take a look at a single ping, and we'll kind of trace that up to the map. So we talk about a single ping. Ping as a data point is and these devices are pinging at 20 data points per second. So that's a lot of data. There's 3,200 bytes per sounding, per ping. And the system is looking at every one of those bytes, every one of those pings. And here's an example. There's just this shows a cross section of the raw acoustic energy. This is that raw backscatter. This is for a single ping. And it's colored just different things to, like, there's always an ambient background acoustic energy, and that's at what we call backscatter. So in the open water, there is just like this ambient energy, and then it hits, let's say you have some aquatic vegetation growing on the bottom. That has a higher signal return. There's air bubbles in that plants. There's just overall structure that gives a signature that we can decipher. It looks like plants. And then at the bottom has the sharpest return. And so we look at the kind of the geometry of that signal, and we can make inferences about where the depth is, what's the top of the vegetation. And then we can infer the plant height. From the plant height, we calculate what biovolume is, and that's plant height divided by the water depth. And then that is simply multiplied by 100 to get a percent. And that's basically how much water column is taken up by plants. One of the challenges is if you're backscatter, if you have a lot of turbulence in the water column, you got a lot of disturbance in the water column. If this kind of noise gets, it kind of fills that entire kind of acoustic envelope, then you can have, some false detections. And so, but there's a lot of things in the BioBase system that can kind of filter that stuff out. And we'll go through some of those techniques. Here's just an example of two examples of here's a ping on a bare bottom, where here you just have a nice sharp rise in the voltage, and that's just there's nothing growing on that bottom. And then here's an example of that vegetated bottom. Okay. Now we put the pings together, and we can talk about different transducers. Depending on your objectives, you can use a higher end Airmar. Airmar is a company that builds transducers that are compatible with Lowrance. They're a little higher power. There's a range of different beam angles you can get if you need a narrower beam. This TM260 is a 6-degree beam. So that has some advantages, and then here is the standard Lowrance active imaging 3-in-1, and that's a 22-degree beam. So here's just an example of what those beams look like on a vegetated bottom. And then here is an example of that down scan, what the outputs look like on down scan. And you can see the downscan sometimes gives you almost an ultrasound-like image of bottom from the vegetation. So there's just two different tools that you can use. And though if we come back to this concept of the beam angle, And we should ask the question, does it make a difference? Let's say we're mapping waters from, 2 to 30 feet. And what difference does that make, between a 6-degree beam angle or 22-degree beam angle? Well, you're at 10 feet, you have about a foot beam diameter with the Airmar versus a 4-foot diameter. But it's pinging at 20 pings per second. And so you get almost a complete coverage of that plant canopy of the bottom with both transducers. So does it make a difference at that depth? Probably not. I mean, it depends on your objectives, but probably not. There was some argument, and we did some preliminary testing on, well, maybe the higher power transducer, the lower beam angle, can make better penetration through the plants and hit bottom a little better through denser plants. We haven't found that. Haven't done a lot of rigorous testing. I would like to see that continue to be kind of tested, but we just preliminary tests, we haven't found that the higher power transducer is really going to give you better detection through really dense plants. But where this cone angle could possibly make a difference is, let's say you're mapping really deep reservoirs, and let's say you're in 100 feet of water. Well, 22-degree cone angle at 100 feet of water, you're looking at the beam diameter of maybe up to 40 feet. And a 6-degree cone angle is, much less, 10 feet. Here's what those look like. And let's just picture like this is, here, this is 100 feet deep, and then this is, I don't know, 50 or 40 or whatever. Where is BioBase taking that depth? On the 22-foot beaming, if your boat is right here, this is the sonar image. If your boat is right here, it may show 20 or it may show, let's just say this was 50 feet. It may show 50 feet on your display that's right here. Whereas if you, in the same area, you were using that Airmar 6-degree transducer, it may show, it's going to probably take the depth right there. So it might show 75 feet. But imagine this thing is moving, your boat is moving. So when you were over here with a 22-foot, transducer, it's going to read 100 feet. But as you're moving up, it's going to show, there's just going to be some imprecisions. The contours, there might be some imprecisions on exactly where those contours are. And then the question you have to evaluate for your study, again, it's going back to fit for purpose. Is imprecision in those contours, where exactly those contours are, is that important? Or is it like, not so much? There's probably cases where you could probably say, yeah, that makes a big difference, and a lot of other cases where no. So just wanted to throw that out there. So moving on to the top down of the view of what the sampled area looks like. So we've been kind of moving from, here's a cross section, here's a top down. It maybe can be disorienting. It's second nature to us because we see this every day. But now we're looking at the top down, and here's your boat going along, and we're talking about single beam data here. We're talking about down looking, single beam, down looking data that we're creating a string of data points. These string of data points, like I was saying, a 22-foot degree cone at 5 feet deep. This is kind of the example of the swath of what is kind of being, what's pinging down there. So the rule of thumb that I use is essentially, for most survey vessels, you put your arms out. That's kind of the width that you're surveying, is basically the width of the boat. You're kind of pinging the width of the boat. And then we're going to talk about, then we use interpolation to predict what's between transect, between boat passes. So this is what that looks like. Here you have these chunks of, these chunks are 1 meter by 1 meter areas. That's essentially what the system is doing, is it's looking at those 20 pings, it's filtering out some of that information, and it's creating like these outputs. It's downsampling the data and giving you outputs every meter. So On the top, this is an example of what that string of data points might look like. The colors of the points is the density of the vegetation. And then here's that side view again. Side view is, here's an example of the bottom. And we have a feature in your account, and I'll show you that when we bounce out to the demo, the web demo, where you can put on this dot overlay and you can see exactly where it's being declared depth and where it's the top of the vegetation. So yeah, that's in my account and in the processing preferences. And that's called Generate Sonar Imagery Overlay. So we'll visit that. But here, here's an example, a blown up example of the point data layer that is created by just going back and forth. This was a really interesting demo output on a lake in Florida. Sheen Lake, I think, is the name. And this was done by an autopilot. And we have, Lowrance manufactures low-cost autopilots, Lowrance and Simrad. And it's a great way. You just basically you plug your transects into your Lowrance display, and you engage the autopilot, and it'll drive itself and create these really nice, crisp back and forth transects. So those are the points, but now we have to create the map. How does BioBase do that? We use creeping, and this is all automated. You don't have to do this yourself. But the system, once the points are created, then the system does interpolation, and it uses a type of interpolation called kriging. And here's an example of what the heat map looks like. And this was done in a third party GIS. And when we zoom in, so what kriging is doing is it predicts unsampled locations based on the values of neighboring points. And it actually, so here's an example of it. There is one point. It has a biovolume value. Let's say in this area, it's maybe 95%. It's not the full deep red. It's a little lighter red. So let's say it's 95%. Then it looks at all of its neighbors, every single neighbor, and as a function of distance. So basically, things that are closer together are more related than things farther apart. And what BioBase does is it creates this. It doesn't make any assumptions. It actually uses your own data to create an actual geostatistical model and making predictions in unsampled locations. And so that's what this is doing, is it's looking at every one of those neighbor points and then making predictions in unsampled locations. The only thing to be aware of is this is a very powerful method for interpolation, predicting between transects. When you're extrapolating, it can get it kind of loses its robustness if you extrapolate, because it really doesn't know what's outside, what's between here and shore. It has no idea of knowing what's right by shore. So just keep that in mind. Interpolation is, I think that's good, that's robust, that's using statistics to make those predictions. Extrapolating, it gets a little, you have to have other data sets to know then, is that legit or not? All right, so that was the vegetation output. And now BioBase also does bottom hardness. And what the bottom hardness algorithm is looking at, it's creating a dimensionless absolute hardness score based on, it's not telling you sediment depth or anything like that. It's just giving you a kind of a hardness score. And that's based on the first and second. The first echo is that first return coming back to the boat. The second echo, that's called a false echo. That's also called an E2 echo, a second echo. That is where the signal goes out from the transducer, hits the bottom, comes back, hits the hull of the boat, and goes down again. And that, if it's a really hard bottom, it bounces off hard and it comes back pretty hard again, and you get a really strong second echo. That is a pretty hard, then BioBase hardness score. and these are the values 0.35 to about 0.5. If you go to the other extreme, soft, the signal's being attenuated into the soft bottom, and it doesn't really reflect back. And so you don't have that second echo, or the second echo is very weak. So that's the second false echo. And then this is just I just got it blown up a little bit. This is just showing you on the map. Here is the deeper red is hard gravel, boulder, and then this medium is kind of where you see sand. There's different hardnesses of sand. There's hard sand, there's soft sand, and everything in between. And then there's the soft mud, which is a light brown. And this is actually from a paper published in 2015. Here is if you're interested in that, this is on Windermere. For our UK friends, it's a beautiful lake in the English Lake District, and this is where they did some Arctic char habitat work. So that was that was a cool study. And then there's also, though, some work that was published here in Oklahoma, and that's estimation of paddlefish spawning habitat using the bottom harvest algorithm as well. And for those of you that do want to maybe take a deeper look to see, what other papers are out there published using BioBase, here's an example of that. We have that blog and here's the web address, and we're always keeping that up to date. So it's blog.biobasemaps.com. And if you just search like literature or references, you can find the updated list of references. And some of those actually link directly to the papers. So, okay. I think now is where we're going to jump to the online demo. Here we go. And we'll kind of take you through a user journey. I have notes here to make sure I cover the major features of BioBase. And then we'll talk about kind of what are kind of those things that are often overlooked, and then just kind of take you through a little tour. Okay. So the first thing that you're going to do, let's say you've been out there, you recorded your sonar to the SD card, you got everything installed right, things are looking good. You record your sonar to that SD card, you pop it out, you put it in your PC, or you put it in your USB reader, you put it in your phone, you log in online, biobasemaps.com, come to sign in here. So you sign up for an account. You can, it's free to create an account, but you have to have a subscription. That subscription could be a free trial, it could be a single water body subscription, or it could be a kind of full-featured unlimited subscription. But here is where you log in with that information. My test account is Shep Torkelson, and hopefully I remember the password. But then, so when you log in, that login site, that's a secure login where it's managed actually by AWS, and so we use their technology to make sure all that encryption and everything is locked tight and all of that. So, but here you come in then to your dashboard. This is where you get your start. One of the first things we want to look at before we get started is I want to show you my account. There's I think people overlook all the settings and kind of the knobs you can turn in my account to kind of get you set up. The defaults are very good. They're very robust, but sometimes there's a lot of times where people want to do like, well, I want to have my grid cells set at 1 meter. I want to have the buffer set at this, or the maximum depth of vegetation set at this. And all of those different things, and there's a lot of controls that you have access to. And so we're going to just go to right now, we're going to skip to processing preferences. And these are an example of global preferences. So every single upload is going to have these things set for your upload. And a good example where you might want to use this is offset. Let's say your transducer is always 6 inches or a foot below the surface. Then you want to add that in here and then hit submit, and that will save those settings. So every upload will have a 1 foot offset, meaning that it will add 1 foot of depth onto your map. Here's where that generates sonar imagery overlay. By default, that's actually off because we have a lot of people that they don't really know or care, and so the dots would probably be confusing to them. So we turn that off by default, but I think for those of you here, now that you're getting the training, I think those dots are going to be really useful for you. So I would go ahead, go in there, turn that on. For the premium subscription levels, you have the side scan feature, and that is off by default. That is where this can be turned on. Again, every upload is going to have that side scan. And side scan for vegetation, when you're in really dense vegetation, it may not be very useful. So I'm not sure. It's up to you though, if you want that on for every upload, or you just want that on for the single upload, or single trips on a case by case basis. I'll take you through some of that. It's also important to know, like everything I've been saying is imperial, but you can go into your measurement preferences, and for our researchers and non-US friends, here's where you can change that to metric, and you might want to, and then every upload is going to have then metric outputs. Okay, storage is another thing. People kind of overlooked that the storage will fill up if you don't have an unlimited subscription. So here is where you can go to storage and see where you're at. Okay, so 17.71 gigs already that I'm using, but with the EcoSound Habitat Plus, I have unlimited storage. If you don't, this is where you can upgrade your storage, and it's a pretty reasonable price. Okay, so we're gonna go back to our dashboard, and I think is there anything else to say about oh, I'm gonna actually go a note about browsers. I'm using Microsoft Edge. So Edge works pretty well. It's a Chrome-based browser, actually. Google Chrome is really where we do most of our testing and developing against. So I recommend using Google Chrome, but Edge works pretty well too. But BioBase should work in Safari fine. Firefox should work in Firefox just fine. Don't think there's anyone using Internet Explorer anymore, and if you are, it's not going to work very well with BioBase. So just a fair warning. All right, so we're actually going to go to Chrome because I have some trips kind of queued up, and but I will take you to the trips and merges part of the dashboard here. This is where you'll be spending a lot of time. This is gonna list all of your uploads. We see where it is in the world because we have a very, very comprehensive water body database, but not all water bodies. Especially, we have a lot of users actually on the call today that are that manage private ponds. And that's another thing to note while I'm on the topic. So there is in my account sharing preferences. Take a look at those, but by default, commercial operators, you're set to private. We won't share. We have a pretty strict privacy policy. We'll never identify kind of this trip was from this person in this part in this location at this time. We never do that. If we do share anything, we may share it with CMAP. We still have a partnership with CMAP where we share aggregated contour data of public trips to aid in like consumer maps for like Lowrance devices. But that no identity information is ever shared. But that's all found in your sharing preferences. Okay, so the point was here is that we don't have for private ponds. If you're working in private ponds or stormwater ponds, we probably don't have those boundaries unless we've been doing a lot of work with you in the past. We don't often, we might not have names as well for those ponds. So we do need to, we'll need to communicate with you to get those water body boundaries in our database, and so you can see it as something you recognize here. The search tool, when you start to get a lot of trips, this can be a pretty exhaustive list. Let's see, and then within each one of these, you click on one of these. You just click on the lake name, and it will this accordion-like feature where it'll pull down all of your trips with start times and end times, who the surveyor was. We have an organization feature that's up actually here that will put you all in the same organization, and you can see multiple people's trips, and you can do merging and things like exporting, and you can do things working with other people's trips. So the bottom line though is that it can get pretty busy, and if there's one water body in particular you want to take a look at, you can use the search tool. And I'm just going to search. So if I want to look at big marine, and that's what I'm going to focus on. So I click big marine, or I search big marine, and now it's only going to list the big marine trips. So I see if there's anything else I need to talk about that. Yep. Oh, since it's on the list here, bulk export. This is what this feature is it will take all the trips that are in this lake, and it will do a bulk export, and that bulk export is the CSV point data. It's a CSV grid data. It is the Google Earth imagery if you have that feature. It is the there is some other kind of data dumps for the entire lake. So for all history. So it is a great feature for doing some of those backups, but there's a lot of things that it doesn't save, like the imagery and all, like a lot of the tool or the sonar imagery and a lot of other tools that you use in BioBase. It won't, save that, but this is just a great backup tool, this request bulk export. All right. So this is just showing you kind of the metadata, when the trip was surveyed and when it was uploaded. And who by gives you a little preview. There's my back and forth track. This is the water body outline. And but we're gonna go into the trip viewer now. All right. So it's the same one here. I'm going to just walk you through the different buttons here, kind of starting out in the upper left and kind of working our way down. So here's a lake name. We have 3 buttons up here. View report. This report is a very popular feature, and we'll continue to add things onto here or create different reports depending on, as new features come out. But this gives you a lot of really good diagnostic information about what the name of the lake, the survey date, the water temperature when you're out on the water, the average water temperature, the survey area, the water volume, the water volume of the area you surveyed, the complete water body area, or the water body volume of the entire lake. Now that's something you need to be, and it shows you what percentage of the water body you surveyed. So that's good information to know. It's like, well, okay, I'll give you water body volume or I'll give you water volume of the lake, but I only surveyed 2.9% of it. So also the how big is the buffer? Then when I say buffer is, how big of an area was interpolated before it was blank, before you can't see the outputs. You can configure that. You can change that. You can increase that. You can decrease that. What's the minimum biovolume detection? Anything less than this, it's going to call it 0. That maybe there's debris on the bottom or something. There's this error that you want to rule out. Minimum biovolume detection. Anything less than that depth, we have less confidence in, and so it's not even gonna. It's not gonna characterize it at all. It's just gonna be cleansed. Those data points will be cleansed. And what's that maximum depth of vegetation? And finally, what sonar channel are you using? I have this on downscan because sometimes, by default, that was another setting I set for with my test account. I wanted to use downscan. Here's the example of the downscan versus primary, and you can see this is a cross section of the area of the sonar image. Here is, and if we click on, here is the dot is where the boat is, where the track is. Here is the deep part of the water body there, and it's all synced. The sonar image is synced with the map, and it's also synced with the data. And we'll show you that soon here. But going back to this sonar image, we have the primary, that's a 2D broadband flashlight beam, think flashlight beam. And then we have downscan. Downscan is that kind of, it's a really nice, clear image of those plants. What's better? I don't know. It's a very subjective term. You will get similar, but they will be different outputs. I'd say experiment with it. Every output, every water body might be different. And so from where I'm sitting, I can't tell you which one works better than the other. Okay. So those are the buttons there. Ask the experts. This is another thing. Use this as a great tool. This will embed a trip ID. The trip ID is this number. This is a really, really kind of important number for us because it tells us what exact trip are you working with. Because if you just say, my uploads on Round Lake, there's something wrong with my uploads on Round Lake. Then we're going to ask a lot of questions. I was like, okay, can you be a little more specific? When you use this feature, this embeds that trip ID, and you can use a screenshot, upload a screenshot. The more information that you can give us about the issue, the better. This is also a great, if you have a water body that does not have a name in our system, you may see a provide name of your water body, or it might be called water body ID or something like that. Like, you can come in here and say, name this Smith's Pond or something. If it's a private water body that we don't have a name for, that's going to help us then rename that. And then you'll be able to see then under Smith's Pond, that'll be on your dashboard, and that will be like instant. So that's the Ask the Experts button. Okay, coming down here, you have, you can toggle on, toggle off the boat track. You can choose what you want to clear. If I want to clear the depth, you can clear if I wanted to clear the depth layer. But here's the layers for the different layers that we have. Here's vegetation. The default is the depth. So the deeper the blue, the deeper the water. And then we can turn on the vegetation. Again, these areas that are blank it's 25 meters by default. Then it blanks anything out of 25 meters, or greater than that, it blanks that output. Now, you don't have to get a full map fill in. You do not have to go back out and drive between those areas. You can if it's really important that you get really good information in this area, then then you'd want to maybe tighten up those transects. But if you just simply want to expand the buffer, that's where you go to tools and you go to trip reprocessing. And we're going to come back to this trip reprocessing form. We'll spend, this is a very, very powerful form. There's a lot of stuff that happens here. But whenever you want to change any output, this is where you do it. And so if I want to increase that buffer, it looks like I might need to increase that to 75 to get complete fill. And then I click on bathymetry, vegetation, composition, and then I hit submit. What that does is when I hit submit, what you're seeing here, this is an image, a PNG image of the map. These images are stored on our remote servers. We use Amazon Web Services, and these images are stored in S3 buckets, and they're just images. They're not raster grid files. But that's what allows you, because these are just images. This is why you can do all this stuff through a browser, through your phone, because you're just looking at images here. But then that means whenever you want to make a change, like you want to increase the buffer or do whatever, you want to edit some of the data in the output, you need to do those you can do those changes locally, or you can tell the system, I want to change this. But then you have to hit this trip reprocessing form and send it back to the servers to create new images and new outputs. So that's an important distinction. I think a lot of, if you're not aware of that, people kind of think that it's just, you upload your file and it should just be done instantly, or you do some change and it just should be kind of done instantly. And that doesn't, it goes fast. I mean, you're talking about now, and as we update our hardware and all that stuff, it's getting faster and faster, but there is a delay, and that's because we have this cloud system, and there's a lot. I think you'll see that you get a lot more benefits with that cloud system but there is some trade-offs, like you just don't get instant. Sometimes you don't get instant gratification. Okay. So vegetation. Here's the vegetation output. The different colors. Red is the vegetation that's growing very near to the surface. Everything is synced. So I can click on here and I can see this is the area of the sonar log, and I'm going to load the depth, or load the vegetation here. Okay, I can click on this. It'll take me to where it is in the take me where it is on the map and also in the sonar image. You can see it's 54% biovolume right there. And then here's 100% right here, but you can see it's going up and down. Here's those red dots basically tracing the vegetation canopy. Okay, so that's the vegetation output. Now, I really like this trip because there's a really neat this side scan. All right, let's just look at the side scan. Okay, we're gonna zoom in here. Let's clear out okay, so right about 23 feet. I don't know if you can see this, but this is actually here. We'll click on here. This is where the vegetation, and again, this is the cross section. This is the top down. You can start to see it about, I'm gonna click here. All right, at about 20 feet, that vegetation starts to disappear, and we can let's clear the contours so we can get a little better view of that. Let's just also, so we're right here. Let's clear the track. So look at that side scan. Isn't that cool? How you can trace, and here's the edge right here, edge of the vegetation. Gives you that image. And one of the things I want to point out, and I'm like, oh, what's this right here? I think this is a gravel patch. So again, let's just look at vegetation first. Look at how well that vegetation kind of maps out, and that's just using interpolation. But then you can use that side scan to kind of see that, where that really is coming out. And then here, I think that's a gravel patch. Well, let's look at the bottom hardness. And sure enough, right there, that's showing a little hard spot of where we saw that little patch with the side scan. So that's kind of neat. Um, so that is the side scan feature. And now looking at my notes here. Okay, polygons. Let's turn back on the vegetation. Polygons. Here's the polygon tool. The polygon tool will give you information about what specifically is in an area of interest. So, and here we'll just we'll just click on management area. This is a hypothetical scenario where, let's say, you're doing an herbicide treatment or doing some kind of analysis, and you just want to get statistics for this area of interest. Let's just collapse this down for now. Keep it clean. Okay. What this does is when you apply this polygon template, it will give you information about the water depth, the average depth, the max, min, vegetation biovolume. So you can do kind of these before after analyses in just a specific treatment area, polygon area. You can get, and you get your water volume in that area. So you can do your dosing, or if you're sizing an aeration system or whatever, it gives you that information. And then it's a simple matter of, I'll just click around the area of kind of the polygon I want to create, double click, we can always refine the area, so on and so forth. And then you can name that, and then that will create the template, and it will basically be like a cookie cutter, and it will save the information. I'm just gonna, just for the sake of brevity, I'm gonna cancel that out. You can export these too. You can export these polygons, the shape files. They come down as shape files. You can convert shape files to GPX crack, and you can put them in your Lowrance display. We've talked about, you can use this, you can send this to your dredge operator or your herbicide applicator as a GPS trail that they can get on their Lowrance. Or if it's GPX, a GPX is you can convert shapefile to GPX. That's an agnostic form they can use on whatever kind of chart plotter or GPS that they have. So that's at exporting the polygons. That's a pretty powerful feature. Another note about the polygons, like once you create these polygons, they will stay in the water body, and they will be available for subsequent surveys. So that's that. All right. Moving on to data offset. This is an important feature. And okay, data offset and then trip reprocessing. The important things to note about both data offset, trip reprocessing. This is how you change things on a local basis, on a per trip basis. So this is and it's going to ignore the global processing preferences, and you can override those here for a specific survey. Like if I want the side scan mosaic for a specific survey, I can do that here. If I want data offset, right, you probably want to look at when you're surveying a water body, and you have, if it's, let's say it's 2 feet low, the water is low, you can put that information in here and add that on to the transducer offset to get a corrected view for that particular survey that may be changing from time to time. Export data. This is where you have a lot of options, and we're putting in new options all the time of like what kind of those data deliverables that you can get back out. And so you can export the CSV data as point or grid. Point is the data along your tracks, or grid. The grid is the interpolated grid. So you can recreate these outputs in GIS. One thing to note though, when you do export this data, let's say you export the map image that we do, if you're using our kind of our imagery and you know, our maps that we create, is make sure that you attribute, you keep the BioBase logo in there, or you attribute that to BioBase. If you're doing your own kind of map and recreating it using your own color palettes and whatever, that's fine. You don't have to identify us in those map images, but if you're using our map images, make sure you properly attribute us. So that's that. And Google Earth and Google Earth exports. This GPS AT5 map chart generation. If you use this, if you put in your chart information about your serial ID, or I'm sorry, your serial number and chart ID of your Lowrance, you can download this exact map, this exact heat map on your Lowrance display. You can do that for your contour map or the vegetation map. So that's just another neat feature. So export data. Okay. See, we're about a little time check, 9:06. Okay, I think we're gonna quickly move through these next couple features so we can get to Q&A. One of some of the feedback that I got from some people is, okay, how can we edit like bad data out? So I think I'll move to that next. And I'm going to use this example here from a lake in Minnesota. One of the things I want to point out, so I have this queued up where I have in one account the data that needs to be edited. I spent some time editing. It took me about a half an hour to kind of clean this up. And then here is the cleaned up data. And one of the things I want you to kind of look closely at is these contours. And to look at the cross section here, the cross section shows that it's a pretty flat bottom. So these contours shouldn't look like this. What's happening in this example, when I click on parts of the map, it's maybe hard to see, but you see some of these black dots. The black dots is the depth. The depth is riding up into the plant canopy with really dense vegetation. That signal gets attenuated, and it thinks that the depth is up in the vegetation. So we need to correct some of them. So again, when I look at this, it tips me off because I'm looking at this sonar image, and these sonar images are pretty powerful. That's one of the tools, or one of the things that people kind of overlook with BioBase, is that you get this cross-sectional, the raw information that gives you some information about what you saw down there. But anyway, we want to clean up some of these bad depths. The way we do that is we're going to load, in these cases, actually, we're going to load the depth tab. And that pulls up all the depth data. So what I did is I went through here and I'm looking at all of these points, and I see the first one is right here. It starts to ride up into the vegetation canopy. Okay, I can zoom in here a little bit, and here you can see, oh yeah, it looks like it was going around at about 9 feet, and then all of a sudden it jumps up to 3.3, 4.76, 3.73, and you can see that string of points. Well, then, okay, then it goes back down to 9.44. We need to be around and kind of maybe that 9.4 depth. You can see where it should be. So then what I'm going to do is I need to change this string of data. I'm going to look at this reference number. Problems start at reference number 89. So I'm going to go to, they start at 89 and then to 94. So I'm going to write down on a scratch pad 89 to 94. Then I'm going to click this modify coordinates. I'm going to type in 89 to 94. And I'm going to put in the depth. The depth should be like 9.4 or something. I'm going to keep going along. I'm going to do that. I'm going to hit submit. So then what this does is it says 6 coordinates modified successfully. Excuse me. That is basic. So it communicates with the database saying, hey, I've got these that are queued up for deletion. It hasn't done any deleting yet. I'm gonna need to hit trip reprocessing and send this thing back. Once I'm done, I'm gonna need to send this back for reprocessing. But I'm not gonna do that yet because there's more I need to do. I'm not gonna go through every one, but I'm just gonna go through a couple of them here. So I'm gonna go along. I'm gonna look for the next one. Okay, looks like here's the next one. There's two of them. There's a lot of data here. There's a ton of data. And what I might look at, just for the sake of time, I'm like, it's 2 data points. You know what? I'm just going to delete these because it's really not going to make a difference. We've got a lot of data. We got almost redundant data. So I'm going to just select these 2 coordinates. And maybe I say, well, if it's 3 or more, I'm going to go through the process to modify the coordinates. But if it's only 2, I'm just going to, I'll just delete them. Okay. Once I'm done with that, I send it back for the trip reprocessing. And then what it's going to do is it's going to come back and it's going to look like this. Nice and clean bottom. One thing to note, we don't have a feature that will update these dots, but the data should be updated. So when you click on the depth, and if we click on any of these areas, there was some areas where we did some modification. You're going to see modified. You're going to see probably some yeses here. Yeah. Okay, so here is an example where we modified the data. It will say that it'll be traced. When we hit view report, it's going to say, was any does this include edited data? Yeah, it does. It does. When you export the data, when you export this this data, export CSV data and the point data, submit. I'm going to submit. We're going to show you that real quick. And I should note that it's not perfect. It gets the job done, and I really want to see improvements to this feature. I want to make this a little more user friendly. That'll happen eventually. It's a it's just a resource issue right now. And so for now, you can get the job done, but yeah, that is definitely an improvement we want to make. But yeah, this just shows you, here's the exported data. Record was edited. False, but then you get down to true here. Yep. So anyway, so that's that. Okay. We have a little bit of time left, maybe 10 minutes. We'll go through the survey design stuff. No, actually, I'm sorry. There's one more thing I want to show you with this. Manual coordinates. Tools. So here's the track. Here's an example of a very shallow lake. We did not sample up here. Let's clear this off. This is a great example. We're gonna clear all. Look at all this dense vegetation. We couldn't get back there, but we're taking notes. We're out there surveying. We're taking notes. We know this is all topped out vegetation, all 100%, and we know it's no deeper than 6 inches. So then what we can do is let's put back on the contours. And let's put back on, and let's look at the manual data. So we just simply we right clicked and then add manual data. You can put the depth in here. You can put manual bio volume. And that's what we did. We did 100% for all of these. So let's just, I don't know, let's just do that. Submit. It just adds that there, and you can hover over that. It's 100% bio volume. Again, the map is not updated because we have to we're doing these local additions and we have to tell the data. We have to tell the system, okay, update this map. We did that, we reprocessed, added our manual data, we reprocessed the trip, and now when we do the vegetation, you can see it's all that nice red heat map. We know that's all 100% there. And then also our report is updated as well. Here's all the manual coordinates that were added. So again, very visible. It's very transparent of what, how you edited the data. And yeah, so there you go. There's the report. Okay. Finally, yeah, sorry for the definitely a fire hose here. Let's get back to the survey design. Okay, get a lot of questions. How far should how should I design my transects? How far apart should they be spaced? That is a really good question. But think where to start. You have to break down your objectives, evaluate your resources. What trade-offs are you willing to make? Um, and these are the questions you should really, the questions to consider. What is the size of the system or systems we're looking at? Are we talking about a 10,000 acre lake? Or are we talking about a 2 acre pond? What is the scale of your question? If we're looking at a really big lake, I mean, do we have property owners that we need to, I mean, do we need to be at the property level scale, or are we trying to get a whole system level survey, or both? What is the smallest scale that I'd like to resolve change? Like, at what level are we trying to get detail? And then kind of what's the budget, time and money, right? So thinking through all of that, and what's nice about BioBase, we kind of built it to scale. So given your resources, you can create a BioBase output, and it's going to match those objectives. Another analogy I like to use is this painting analogy. Are we painting a flat wall? Is this a very like shallow basin, not or a shallow kind of bowl or a simple bowl? You can go ahead, you can drive fast, you can drive 7 miles an hour, 7 to 10 miles an hour, and you can use wider transects, and you're slapping that paint on like a big roller. Or are we painting a cabinet? So we got to get a smaller brush, and we got to work the paint into all the cracks. Complex lake bottom features. We got to map slow and tight in that case. Um, Another thing is thinking again, like fit for purpose, right? Like, okay, are we mapping a huge warehouse and all we have is, BioBase, or I mean, or are we mapping are we cabinets in the kitchen or cabinets in a warehouse? So, you're not going to bring in a little brush to a warehouse if you have to paint those. You're going to bring in the big multi-beam, right? You're going to bring in the big stuff, but it's also big budget. So that's just something to keep in mind. Um, so here's an example, 250 acre lake. And here's just an example of that transect design, 40-meter transects. And this took us about 58. If you do 40-meter transects on a 240 acre lake, you can get pretty good, and we got pretty good detail, and that was took us like 4 hours. So 58 or somewhere around 4 hours. I don't my math. I might be getting my math wrong, but we calculated it out to be about 58 acres an hour of mapping. Um, Transect design considerations. The rule of thumb is um, it's a rule of thumb. I use a 1/5 rule. Don't interpolate an area that is 5 times less than your transect spacing. Um, some other design considerations is transect number, spacing, design. Do we want to do parallel, perpendicular, concentric grid, the speed of travel? Again, are we painting that wall or cabinets? Yeah, and here's that 40-meter spacing, 3.5 knots speed. You can map about 58 acres an hour. I've actually been finding we've been getting really good results that I've seen with this concentric circle design. And that just seems to be really efficient, where you just basically start this track on the outside of the pond and then or lake, and then you kind of move your way in following the track on your display, eventually getting to the middle, and then you're done. It seems to get a nice output. But here's a quick scenario. We got to move through here pretty quick. 'Cause I do want to leave some time for questions. But if you have time to stay a little bit after, that would be great. It's not like the thing's gonna end hard at on 10 minutes here. But here's an example where, let's just say you have a Eurasian water milfoil infestation on a lake in the Pacific Northwest, Washington State Park. They say you're a service provider, and they want you to survey it and tell them how much milfoil you found. And vegetation in the lake is naturally patchy and sparse. You don't know where exactly the vegetation is growing. So you're gonna have to kind of do a reconnaissance. You're gonna have to kind of do the whole lake to find out where is the vegetation. You have to throw some rakes um and so in that example, we don't know anything. We don't have a contour map. You got this lake that's an hour, and this is just hypothetical. I have no idea what Lake Cushman is really like. Um, so let's just say it's an hour from the nearest field office. The maximum speed you should drive the boat is probably 7 miles an hour. And then, you see vegetation, you need to stop and right. Okay. Uh, so when I say working backwards, this is what I have, and I need to figure out the best way to execute. I can't, given our resources, we can't spend more than 2 days in the field. We have 6-hour work days, factoring commutes. But we have two boats, travel speed of, like 5 miles an hour. We have to slow down on the turns. You do all this math, in one 6-hour day, a boat can cover 30 miles. If we think 30 miles per boat, we got two boats, multiply that by 2 days, we can cover 120 miles of transect. So you can just do this math and kind of figure out, and then Google Earth, you're playing with drawing the transects and the spacing, and like, okay, I got my spacing here, and it's 120 miles, and I can get this coverage, and it's really interesting how it really ends up working out. It's pretty close. You got to be also thinking of when you go out there, which way the wind's blowing. Right? If you're going to have north winds in day one, you probably don't want to start down here on the south end. So you got to look at that kind of stuff too when you're doing survey design. Okay, scenario 2 is you're working forward. So let's just say in this example, you need to produce a full bathymetry vegetation bottom hardness for 5,000 acres Stan Lee reservoir that I made up based on my favorite Marvel patriarch. There's no time limit given, but taking all summer and scanning every inch of the water, that's not an option. So what transect spacing and design would you use? If you're doing, 5,000 acre lake, that's a pretty big lake. So you just want to get an overall survey of the lake. So we can use kind of big grid cells, big buffer, kind of just get an overall kind of look. And then you just go through and do some of this math, and you get, it's like, okay, 5 work days, and get a pretty decent map, and you create a budget from there. Okay, talked about water level offsets, and we won't dwell on that. All right, yeah, this is Drink from the Fire Hose, one of my favorite. This is an old movie called UHF, and that was one of the in this movie is drinking from the fire hose. The kids lined up, and so that's what we did here. Anyway, Ryan, take
So
it away. Come on in.
first question
What do we got?
is modifying the depth better than deleting the point in
Yeah,
terms of
yeah, that's a good question. What I would say is I'd use that. I'd look at how many depth points you would have to delete. And another thing to note that if you delete the depth points, you're I know I'm not. It may also affect the vegetation. You're going to be deleting the vegetation as well. But again, interpolation will probably take care of that. So if you're only deleting maybe a handful of points, it's probably fine. But anything more than kind of quote unquote handful, like what does that mean? I don't know. It's really up to, I guess, the objectives of your study.
I think I covered this mostly in the response, but can you please lay out the different situations where you would use the primary versus the downscan channel?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. Um, oh, and actually, oh yeah, no, actually, I have a really good answer. It's a little niche, but it happens. You all here, you encounter what's really interesting. Everyone encounters their own little niche circumstances, and it's one of the challenges that we have to try to develop things that are going to cover all those circumstances. But here's an example. There was like some invertebrates coming up off the bottom. and these invertebrates are pretty small. I think this was actually mysis shrimp on the Newport Bay in California. But you could think of Chaabris, or you could think of a lot of other invertebrates. They come up off the bottom, and down. So what was happening was the primary channel was seeing that as vegetation. But then when you clicked over on the down scan, you could see that, oh, that I'm not seeing that mysis shrimp. It's not coming into the imagery. I wonder if I process it with down scan, if that would, like, remove that from the output. And sure enough, it did. So it's those things like that where when you're doing primary, the primary is what BioBase was developed for, was the 2D sonar. That's why it's default. It works in most of the cases. I'd stick with the primary, but in some cases, maybe you're getting better outputs with the down scan, and it's just a kind of on a trial basis.
Next question is, can
Yeah.
you explain the difference or the relationship between interpolation buffer distance and grid cell size?
Yes.
Maybe touch
Yes.
on the meaning of those two just a little bit more in detail.
Yes. Let's go here. Let's see how well I can do here. Okay. Grid cell. You know what?
Maybe while you're
Uh,
looking for
well,
that
I was just
answer.
the reason why I'm just thinking it's like, oh gosh, I got the perfect slide, but I don't want to waste time navigating for crap on my desktop. I'll just explain it. So the grid cell size is like that pixel size. And just think about a picture. So the pixel size is on your cell phone, right? Megapixels. And you're getting better and better resolution all the time. And so the pixel size is like that grid cell size. The smallest grid cell size that you can get is in this kind of system. That's another thing with consumer sonar. It's 1 meter by 1 meter. Anything smaller than that, and that's the best resolution that you're going to get. Which for most of the stuff that most people do is good enough resolution. The buffer is how big of an extent. How big is that picture? How many pixels, like 600 by 400 or whatever. That buffer is controlling how big of a map, how much interpolation do you want to do? Or and then that's the thing, is extrapolation, right? Let's we put on this track here, and let's just put back on the contours, right? If we want, let's just put the trip reprocessing. What did I put in here for the? I put 50. I could put in there 200, 300 if I want. But how comfortable are you in going way out and predicting down to this 1 meter area?
And to touch on
How's that?
that,
Yeah. Mhm.
how does adjusting the buffer affect the confidence in the measurement and values at the edge of, or affect the measurement values of the data at the edge of the map?
Yeah, really, really good question. So we have the database of these water body boundaries. You can see it's a really nice boundary here. That boundary is a zero. We call it a zero boundary. That means on shore, the water depth is 0. And so the depth contours, you can see that they get just interpolated. So here the last depth measure was probably in 2 feet of water. So it knows it's 0 right here and 2 feet right here. So it's just going to create a nice smooth contour between 0 and this 2 feet. It does not now with the vegetation. It does not assume vegetation is 0 right here. It is just going to, I kind of described this as it's going to bleed. The vegetation is just going to bleed to the shore. If this was 100%, it's going to bleed out to whatever. It'll slowly decrease to whatever. Or if there's no vegetation here, you'll see probably no vegetation on shore. But you don't know what that's extrapolating. So that's where you'd use that manual vegetation to help train that algorithm.
To touch again on the water body boundary, would you
Yeah.
recommend a trip around the total shoreline, even with tight transects?
Uh, um, yeah, I probably would. Depending. Yeah, I think it's just a good. I think it's a good practice to do it, to do that single trip around to really kind of trace the edge of that littoral zone or that bench or wherever that's dropping off. That's just going to help you get a more precise map. Yeah, it's good. It's a good question.
If you adjust the transducer offset and or other depth offset, does that impact the minimum depth reading for vegetation, or does that minimum depth reading rely on the original recorded value?
It's going to rely. So if you use, so let's just, yeah, that minimum depth vegetation, it's gonna cleanse out that data. The data is going to be gone. And so if you add an offset on that, the data won't come back into it won't come back into the picture. Um, so that's actually, but that's a really good question. But yeah, in that case, that that the depth offset happens if you think about the order of operations, the depth offset happens late in the process. So it's not going to change any of those original settings.
Are there any AI plugins to help distinguish between sonar signatures of different aquatic vegetation monocultures? For example,
Not
can we pick out on weed or water milfoil?
not yet on an automated basis, but let's say I was going through over here. Um, Not like I said, not yet on an automated basis, but there is manual techniques and there is actually some R&D and published papers that are that have developed a proof of concept that are taking Lorentz downscan imagery and doing species typing. So I am hopeful that, things all move slower in this industry because it's so niche, but I'm hoping, as consumer technology and these developments take place, that we can make a few tweaks and apply. I don't know if you guys use Google Lens, but it's incredible in terms of doing like terrestrial image classification, so things like that. If those become more an open source and in the consumer marketplace, like if we can make and use those little tweaks, then I can see that happening where we can do more automated vegetation typing. But for now, you'll have to use tools like this to say like, oh, here's an example, and I'm gonna just increase my. This is another tip or trick, right? I increase my browser zoom. I know right here using sampling out here, sampling in this, when I threw the rake, when I click on this area, this low growing vegetation is actually muskgrass. It's a Kara. And so I can kind of tell looking at this, and I could use in GIS, I could use these manual things, these manual uh, ways of typing. Well, maybe all this area where the bio volume, okay, here actually, go to vegetation, right? We click on vegetation. We look at this vegetation, we know that, gosh, all this other stuff, the vegetation was like 2 feet and higher. And then as we got deeper depth, say as we got deeper, you know, the the plant height that was, between 0 and 2 feet, that was that Kara. So just there's only manual ways you can do that right now.
And then can you just touch on the waypoint naming a little bit more?
Oh,
And
yes.
then how do you overlay waypoint naming over the trip data? I
Yes,
think,
that's a good, yeah. No, go ahead. Would you clarify something, Brian?
no, go for it. I think you're going to answer.
Well, I did not get to waypoints. And the waypoint feature is very functional, but it's not advanced. But what you can do, at least, we don't have the waypoint naming feature available yet. But what we can do is you just browse. I should have this kind of queued up, ready to go here. Testing, waypoints. So these are all my, let's say these are all my coontail points. This is not on this lake, but you can upload. It doesn't matter where it is. We're gonna hit upload and cross our fingers and hope it works. File uploaded, great. So we don't have a way that you can like add labels and populate the labels in BioBase, but at least what you can do is see where all the coontail, where we sampled coontail, then you could turn on, if this was on Orchard Lake, we could turn on vegetation and it would show you where the vegetation was. And then we'd say, these are all the coontail points. So it's pretty rudimentary. There's one other really though good feature that you would probably find useful, and that is, so that's CSV, but you can also upload GPS. So if you save waypoints on your Lowrance device, let's say you're out there sampling, like, okay, I got to catch a waypoint for this because this is some important point. You can take that file, export that from your Lowrance, and upload that to your map. So you can get those points overlain onto the BioBase map, and you can see, and that's one way you can see it all together. So,
And just to touch
yeah,
on
how about
that,
a couple more questions, and we'll wrap it up.
yeah, sure. Just revamping the waypoint feature as a whole is really high on the feature priority list that we have. But as of right now, that looks like that's all of the questions, unless
Oh,
any of
cool.
them come through.
Okay. Okay.
Anybody else have a question?
Well, great. Well, thank you all. Worked out. I think worked out. We finished just in time. We're a little over, but thank you. And we'll get this published, and we may follow up with some of you to see, or feel free to contact us if you have any follow-up questions.
Just one more snuck in,
Yeah.
and it's easy to answer. How do you upload the contour map on your Lowrance for a private lake? And I think we went over that feature earlier, the
Yep,
AT5.
that's fine. That's fine. You'll come into your, and I can just focus. We'll give you 30 seconds here. You go into my account, you go to plotters or click plotters here. You're gonna go add device. You're gonna go to your settings on your Lowrance. There's a gear wheel, and you're gonna go down to about, and then there'll be a serial number and there'll be a content ID. Right now, our system will it encrypts it for your specific device, and then you select what kind of device it is. You're gonna so you're gonna save that. That's gonna be in your account. And then when you go to your trips and merges, and we'll zip over to this, we'll zip over, let's say right here. You go to export data, you go to GPS AT5 map generation. The plotter I have registered is this one. I want all available layers, and then you hit submit. And then what that does is that then creates a GPS file. All we're gonna do is, let's see what's inside of this. Okay. Yep. And then we're just going to unzip that. We got to unzip it. And we'll call it, Washington. I think that was the name of this lake. Yeah. Browse. Oops. Extract. All right. So then we can get downloads. We go to Washington. And then we take and we cut that whole folder. We copy and paste that onto our SD card. And then we pop that into our unit, and it should then read, do you want to display this map? And you just say yes, and there you go.
And
All
then,
right. Yeah.
lastly, if we have a minute,
Sure.
I think I missed this, but can you touch on fish density you mentioned?
Yes. It is an early view. I can't share much more yet, but we are working on a fish layer, and that layer is going to give you fish counts. It will give you fish depth. It will identify schools of fish and the location of those fish. and we're gonna give it, and then we're gonna do a fish density map. And that will be a partnership and layer that we're announcing in 2025. We hope that it will be available by, not totally sure, but hopefully March, April, somewhere around there. So stay tuned on that. We're pretty excited about it, but I think that's all we can kind of say about that.
If you're
So
looking for updates on the fish layer, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook,
yes,
Instagram. Um,
yep,
we do
yep,
have a Twitter, but those three are going to be your biggest sources of
yep.
information.
And our
Um,
mailers will be sending. Yeah, great. Well, thank you everyone. Have a very happy holidays, and thank you all for joining, and I'll see you soon. Take care.